The perfect weekend for Marc Marquez, and I mean literally perfect. Every session topped. First time that someone's done that since he done it at the Saxon Ring in 2015. Yeah, the King of Aragon perfectly summed up his weekend. And yeah, Lewis, what did you think of the weekend as a whole? I think it was interesting in terms of you take Mark out of it. Alex Marquez still limiting the damage because he probably was thinking, well, Mark's going to clean up here. I need to be behind him, and he was there. Interestingly, I suppose the big one from the race yesterday, Pecco Bagnaia taking a step, it seems, with the, I believe, 15 mil change on the brake disc size, and that's all of a sudden giving back the confidence that he craves in the front. Yeah, they're currently testing at the minute, and Marc Marquez is fastest, but it's a nice building block into the double header at Mugello and Assen, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the big story there is Pecco Bagnaia's sort of finally found something, and we've kind of heard it before where they thought they've maybe found something, but it hasn't worked. But it does seem, get the impression from the Ducati camp, the impression from Davide Tardozzi, certainly the impression from Pecco is that actually, yeah, this is the step forward, and it's something they never thought about, which was changing the brake disc to a slightly bigger brake disc, so you can brake harder without. Essentially, you can brake more with less sort of braking power. So it stops this front locking that he's been having. It gives him back that front end feeling. So yeah, the result doesn't necessarily suggest a big step forward because it's another third place for Pecco behind the two Marquezes, which we've seen before already this season. But it's a starting point. It's the fact that they went through the whole Aragon weekend completely chasing their tail. I mean, after that sprint where Pecco was 12th and he was like, I'm locking everywhere, I can't do anything, no idea, totally lost. To then all of a sudden it being quite a rapid change on the Sunday. Like, it wasn't the case of they made a step and he was 6th, 7th. He was, there was that battle with Pedro Acosta, which I think really proved the point of where that front end confidence has come back from, because you wouldn't really have been able to do that in recent rounds, I don't think, had they not made that step. So yeah, I think we can look at this as the beginning of a turning point for Pecco. It's probably come a bit too late because he's now 93 points behind Marc in the championship. Of course, Pecco did overturn a 91-point deficit in 2022, but we are dealing with a completely different set of circumstances here. But at the very least, from the next sort of rounds onwards, hopefully we'll now see the real Pecco Bagnaia turn up, which, is what we've been wanting to see all year.
Yeah, I think that for me, when I watched the Grand Prix yesterday, and I noticed that he got a good start, and then you could see in the early laps, I was like, well, he's staying on here with Alex Marquez, and it was a really good ride, to be honest, because confidence-wise for him, as you say, to be 12th in the sprint, it was almost like an all-time low, I think, in terms of even other riders looking at him when they were following him. Jack Miller talked about, he noticed how Pecco's riding style was completely off to how he usually is, the way he was using his body, and how he wasn't able to be at one with the bike, and especially the longer corners. I don't want to get too ahead of myself saying that he's firmly back. I do believe that it's a starting point, as you say, but I think that today's test, even Pecco said the tracks will be extra grippy. The lap time might flatter some people looking at it from the outside, but he wants to get to Mugello now and think, right, do what we've done in Aragon. He said this change of mentality about, just kind of standing there and just being patient and waiting and building up. And I think that's the approach he needs to take, because personally, Alex Marquez had him at arm's length yesterday, and you could see that. Alex was fantastic, and as Pecco touched on, didn't make any mistakes, and that's what Alex has done this year. He's noticed from Pecco saying that Alex doesn't make these mistakes anymore if you put him under pressure. And yeah, Mark going up the road, I think, just kind of shows there's still this gap, but at least Pecco's not the, how could I say, the 4th or 5th Ducati now. It seemed like that yesterday, that he had finally just went, right, enough of this, let's get into, how could I say, not champion mode, but mentality change was very good this weekend, and I think it shows a lot, doesn't it, bouncing back from that awful sprint that he had.
Yeah, and I think he made quite a pertinent point when he said, look, this Aragon last year was a track I wasn't very good at, and we've seen kind of mixed form from around Aragon over the years, so to come away from Sunday's race with a really good result even compared to last year. I think that's where this confidence comes from. And I think if you look at the race pace as well, like, he was well, 0.120 tenths per lap slower than Marquez, which, is not going to win you a Grand Prix, but it's not as bad as it's been at some races. We've seen it at races before where it's been upwards of 3 tenths, sometimes half a second, per lap. If you think back to Thailand, for example, where you look at kind of the last sort of portion of that race when Mark had got his tyre pressure back up, and he was just, if that was the pace he was going to be running the whole race, and he was, nobody was getting anywhere near him. So it's closed in. He was very close in pace, about half a tenth maybe per lap difference to Alex Marquez, and I think probably you could argue that some of that comes from that early battle with Pedro, so he lost time there, he's had to push his tyres a bit, and then obviously when you get to a certain point behind a bike, you kind of struggle to break, any further forward if you're on quite a similar pace. So, and just with this aero with the ride height device, so I think that's another thing we saw there. But as Pecco said, Alex rode perfectly. He absorbed all the pressure, so I have to kind of come up with a new way of going up against him. But I think the fact that the pace was pretty much the same, the fact that a bad circuit for him versus a good circuit for Alex Marquez, he was quick here last year as well, and podium here a few years ago in the Honda. These are really positives going into the next two races, which have been strongholds for Pecco. Mugello and Assen have been circuits in recent years where he's cleaned up, so he doesn't expect that to be the case this year. To his credit, he said, look, we've made a step forward, but I don't think I'm all of a sudden, it's a flick of a switch. But the worry we had, I think, going into these next two races was that we've seen already at strong circuits for Pecco this year, and he's been nowhere. Now, at a weaker circuit, he's been up there, and going in stronger circuits, in theory, there should be that step forward. So, yes, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but I do think, on balance, everything we've seen up to this point now, this is maybe the first genuine... No, it's not maybe, it is the first genuine step forward for Pecco this season.
Yeah, it absolutely is, and like I say, I couldn't have came at a better time coming into your home Grand Prix at Mugello, especially as you say, one of the last 3 Grand Prix there, Ducati's home race, and the emotion from Davide Tardozzi was quite telling yesterday. You could tell that he really, it was like almost a relief that obviously Pecco had found this step at his side of the garage, and it was quite funny that he said that Mark was just kind of doing Mark things, they expected that, and I think that they were really just their happiness came from Pecco obviously smiling again and being on the podium. So yeah, we'll see how it goes as they head to Mugello, because if you get Mark versus Pecco at Mugello, 2 factory bikes, I mean, that would be a pretty cool sight to see, wouldn't it? So yeah, I want to talk about Alex Marquez before we talk about Mark and what he did. How special do you think it is for Alex to get to this point of the season, Lewis, and still be the guy behind Mark, and almost guaranteed, and I know it's very early saying this, but I think it guarantees him a top 3 place in this championship now. I think he's shown that it's no fluke anymore. He is the guy who is maximising that GP24 package, and to minimise lose only 8 points over your brother in the dominant fashion that Mark had over him at the weekend, I think pretty much plan went to, it was a success, wasn't it?
Yeah, 100%. I think in the pre-season I predicted Alex to be a top 3 rider this year, just based on kind of what we'd seen at the end of last year, and then in the winter on that GP24, he has looked like the rider that I think certainly Mark has always thought, has always known he could be. And the fact that the championship lead is only 32 points is as much credit to Alex Marquez's consistency as it is to the mistakes that Mark has made this year. And yeah, Alex knows more than anyone when you come to a circuit like Aragon, you are going to be playing second best to Mark. So I think really from the off in Aragon, he looked at, okay, second. This is get through this weekend with a couple of seconds, and that's great. Mugello should be, it's a good opportunity for him. At Assen as well, there will be tracks where the GP24 is going to be better suited, especially some of the the newer tracks. We go back to Brno, we go to Hungary where we don't have any recent data. That's where a bike like the GP24 will kind of come into its own a little bit, because well, everyone's finding their feet. The GP24 we know works everywhere. So, I think this has been Alex Marquez's approach. He's just patience. He knows that the bike is good. He knows that his opportunity will be there. He knows that on the weekends where Marc is better, if Marc makes a mistake, he's the one in the best position to pick up the pieces. So, yeah, I think full credit to Alex. I think things might start to get a bit harder now if Pecco Bagnaia has made this step forward and he continues to make this step forward. He will start to find it harder to be that consistently runner-up in that position to pick up the pieces. But, as we saw in Aragon, he rode perfectly. And you look at his fastest lap was a 46.8 right at the end. And to be fair, so was Pecco's as well. He was slightly quicker actually on lap 22 or 23. So there was nothing wrong with the pace of either of them. But just that consistency of Alex to be able to build that gap and defend that pressure and still be super fast at the end on a well-used tyre, was a really impressive performance. And yeah, I think Michele Massini said this after the race, that they know what their limitations are when they go up against Marc, so they are just maximising absolutely everything, and ultimately that's what will win you a championship. Marc he's only 32 points, he crashes again at a Grand Prix and Alex wins, all of a sudden the gap's gone again. So I think that's really been the genius of Alex Marquez, that he's kept that pressure on by just being consistently there. And it's very much what Martin did last year in the championship. He didn't win that much. He wasn't really necessarily outright the fastest rider, but he was just there. And then whenever Pecco made a mistake, his consistency kind of almost doubled the damage. So I think this is what Alex Marquez is doing and what he just needs to keep doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, as Marc, you said, Marc touched on that as well. He's always thought that Alex should do this, and I think the Gresini team also said that they believe that Alex should do it. Just they know the character that he is, and they know the talent that he possesses. They knew the package that he got this year was going to be the one, essentially. And I think that, yeah, he's impressed me so much mentally in terms of, he say he crashes in practice, and he has one bike in qualifying now. I think Alex Marquez of old would crash that in qualifying again, looking for too much, and he'd scupper his weekend. I think he's so mentally switched on this year in terms of being able to reset, and I think it's the number one thing for a MotoGP rider at a top level. If you're able to put things behind you really quickly and reset and just do the job and put things out of your head, that's why the top level riders are so good. And I think Alex Marquez is reaching that this year in terms of how consistent he is, as you say. I mean, it's mad to think though, isn't it? It's only 32 points, and some people would probably think when you see the results, well, why is it not 80 odd over Alex? But it's really because when Marc makes the mistakes, Alex is there to capitalise. And yeah, 61 points I think he has over Pecco Bagnaia, so it's a big gap for Pecco to even bridge towards Alex. So if you're not going to get the battle at the front, maybe this is the battle to look at further into the season. So yeah, I think that Alex has got what he has. I don't believe he has anything new today. He said he didn't know what Ducati were going to give him and Gresini to test today, so we'll have to probably wait and hear what he says later on today. He's currently sixth fastest as the morning session's going on at Aragon. Marc is currently top. He's just on the fastest time on a 45.9, so yeah, make of that what you will. I think Marc's fairly comfortable around Aragon, and I suppose we can look at that weekend for Marc, Lewis. I mean, I don't know how fast he could have went yesterday. I think he was just controlling it so much in the race, and it was incredible to see how when he raised his pace, the others then would raise their pace at the very end. And I think it suggests to me that Marc was just in this, I don't know, just Marc of old when he gets into that groove again. And as I said, the start 10 years since he last done a perfect weekend, since anyone done one. And he talked after the race, if you heard it, about he thought about the mistakes, and then it refocused him and he done fastest laps. I mean, what do you make of that? It was a perfect weekend, really, wasn't it?
I think he spoke about it all weekend, and I think there is an element here that he has been rattled by those mistakes, because, he said, with Ducati, we understand, why these mistakes happen, but I think there is probably an element in his mind where he's thinking, I'm not super sure because my feeling with the bike is good, I am faster than everyone. Why have I made these mistakes again? So I think there was a real mental hurdle to kind of get over. Again, a little bit like Martin in Indonesia last year, where he had that crash in the sprint and he was like, oh God, what happens if it happens again? And he thought about it and thought about it. And, obviously he managed to overcome it. And that's what Marc did as well. And it feels like a big hurdle has been surmounted here in terms of, okay, yeah, Aragon's a strong circuit for him, but so was Kota. And he mentioned that a couple of times actually, was that like, look, this should have been the same kind of situation in Kota, and I crashed. So, he as a factory rider, he becomes quite tight-lipped about what's changed on the bike. We know, obviously, Le Mans and Silverstone, they were running a slightly different chassis. He said they went back to something. I wonder if he means he went back to the older chassis. It's very hard to tell. He insists he insists he's essentially on a GP24, which we know not to be true. The GP25 does have a different engine. It does have different ride height device, different other bits and bobs. I think it's got a different suspension as well. So, it makes things complicated to understand just what he's doing with the bike. But fundamentally, they've been able to go back to something that's given him that feeling that he had at the start of the season. And when he's like that, as we saw in Thailand, in Argentina, really in Austin before the crash, he was 2.5 seconds up the road from Pecco at that point. Qatar as well. You're not going to get close to him. You're not going to beat him. And that feels very much like what happened in Aragon, was him going, okay, you are not going to beat me when I am like this. And that's a concern for the others. The fact he came through Silverstone, which is maybe arguably his weakest circuit, with the third place.
Yeah.
Now he's getting to circuits where he is stronger and isn't, or the weaknesses aren't as big as well. That is going to be harder and harder for his rivals to beat. And if he's finally gotten over this sort of hurdle of, okay, I've made these crashes on Sundays, then that's another kind of element that his rivals can't use. They can't pressure him then into mistakes because he's not going to crack. So yeah, we are now entering a new phase in the championship, I think, and one that is probably going to see him stretch his legs over the next sort of, basically run into the end of this first half of the championship. I think will be quite telling as to where the land lies for the rest of the championship, and I don't think it's going to look particularly good for anyone that isn't Marc Marquez.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've seen this story before. So I have, when he gets into this phase of the championship you're entering now, and he starts to chip away, and he chips away, and he waits for a mistake from someone who's chasing him, and then it just goes up and up and up. And then before you know it, you're looking at like a massive points lead. And it's like, well, he figures it out eventually. And I think the key thing for me was, he kind of got asked about it the weekend, and he, as you say, he won't say what's changed on the bike. He talked about how Ducati have helped him, I think Pecco as well, with getting the front ride height device in at the start. They've changed the system they have on the handlebars and everything, and he won't talk about that, but he says that makes him very comfortable knowing that everything's fine at the start. He's also being more patient with the front tyre at the start, which is arguably why he crashed in Jerez and Silverstone. So he knows now why he's crashed, and he knows to be more patient. I think that was even displayed in the sprint when he didn't get a great start. The rear span up, but he was already third going into turn one, and then he waited, Lewis. He waited and waited, and then he knew, okay, the pace is there, let's go. How do you compete with that when someone is doing that? You just have to sit back, and I think people have to appreciate that no matter what you try, sometimes it's not going to work, is it?
Yeah, and I think that's part of the problem, is that it's kind of a bit unpredictable as to what he's going to do, because you listen to the riders and they'll say on Friday, Marc's a step ahead, so then they assume that he's just going to lead from the front, but then he has something like the sprint, and then Alex Marquez ends up in a position where, oh, well, hang on a minute, maybe I can do something here, so then you push harder, and then you chew up your tyres, and then Marc comes through anyway, and then instead of finishing second, you finish third. That's kind of sort of, that's the kind of the real sort of tactical genius there of Marc, is that he's able to be really adaptable on the fly, to the point where others think that a door is opened and then they change how they ride completely. and then they get stung even more than maybe they would do, had the race gone to how they imagined it. So, yeah, it's a hard one to battle with, and they know that, and there really isn't much more that they can do. Like they're Alex Marquez is riding as best he can on that bike. We're yet to really see the true potential of Pecco yet. So, maybe over the next few rounds we will see someone step up on equal machinery who can go head to head with Marc. But yeah, when he's in this groove, when he's riding like he's riding, he's clearly enjoying it, and that's another thing as well, is that he's not only is he quick and he's dominant, he's enjoying it, and he's not done that for a while. And that's when Marquez is at his most kind of problematic, was because when he enjoys it, the pressure's off. So yeah, it's going to be a tough few weeks, I think, for his rivals. But this has been MotoGP. We came into Aragon off of 5 different winners. So
yep.
It has had this tendency to kind of change around a little bit this year. So let's not write off Mugello and Assen back to back. Completely, we know what Assen can be like, especially. So yeah. Let's see how it goes. But certainly, you look at the way Marquez is right now, and how do you even begin to contemplate how to beat that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you're just bagging on him making mistakes, but it doesn't seem like it now, because he's very hard on himself, as you say, Lewis. It really eats at him. You can tell when he gets annoyed, when he gets brought up to him, and then when he talks about it, you can see that, oh wow, like there's a little bit of the inside of the psyche of the top level athlete in MotoGP, the best in MotoGP, and you see how he processes things, and it's almost like you see the slip of the mask. And when he doesn't want anyone else seeing the weakness, he'll talk about it briefly, and then he'll put it away again in the little box at the back of his head, and then it'll go away. But I think that going into Mugello, I think he's 92nd Grand Prix win he took yesterday, so he's looking to win 90. Is it 92 or 91?
I think so. I can't remember.
Yeah, so he's in for his 93rd Grand Prix win, and I think if he takes pole position, next time it'll be his 100th pole position. So Marquez is getting into the territory now with stats and numbers. I know he doesn't look at it like that, but he's very much like, this is what should have happened 5 years ago with Marc, isn't it? Like, where the numbers should have been building up to the point where he's getting to the top end of the charts. And yeah, it's great to see someone, what he's been through, come back and kind of resume where he should have been 5 years ago. So yeah, enough about Marc. Just briefly on, not movements in the MotoGP, Moto2 field, but what do you make of the Manu Gonzalez test for Trackhouse? Surprising, but is this, the Trackhouse have said it's not an audition, but to me it seems like they're wanting to try and test out a few people to see what their potential is.
Yeah, I mean, you can't look at it as anything other than the patience with Raul Fernandez has run out, because Silverstone, Massimo Rivolta was asked about it, and he said, look, he has been underperforming. He has been. Last year was a little bit tricky for him in terms of having to swap bikes, but there was an expectation that he was going to take a much bigger step forward this year, and he hasn't. I've got some points in front of him. He doesn't even appear in the top 16 in the points. That's what we're looking at, and especially since Aiguru's come in and sort of pre-injury was very, very good, for a rookie on a reasonably tricky bike as well. So, they had an opportunity. They've seen, but Trackhouse's ethos has very much been geared towards, giving people opportunities. That goes to the NASCAR project as well, as they kind of pointed out in their press release, with kind of promoting Conor Zilic through the ranks to get to the sort of top level in the Cup Series. So, it's good for them to kind of use that spare bike as an opportunity to give a young rider. Of course, in an ideal situation, Jorge Martin would not be absent, and therefore you would just stick Lorenzo Savadori on the bike and he would do his testing there. That speaks to the kind of the problems that Aprilia has right now in terms of its roster of reserve riders, because most manufacturers have a couple of names they can call on, whether that's for official test riders, whether that's from World Superbikes. Aprilia is one of those that's very much kind of in a position where it doesn't really have that. It's used up its one car essentially, which is Salvatore. So there is an element of that here as well. Let's be frank, but certainly it's hard to not look at this as an opportunity for next year. Yes, Raul has a contract, but as we've been hearing over the past few weeks, 2-year contracts don't really mean much. We've obviously had all the Jorge Martin stuff, but we are now hearing that Miguel Oliveira is likely to be the odd one out at Pramac, despite having a 2-year contract. We've seen other riders with 2-year contracts have them ripped up and put in the bin. So,
yeah,
I think Raul isn't performing. I think just because he has a contract for next year doesn't save him. And I think if you're Aprilia and you've seen how well it's gone with a rookie already, you would be looking at the job Gonzalez is doing right now and going,
cheaper as well. You can get him on a cheap price.
Yeah, but it's more that he's a proven thing, and I think this is the thing with Raul Fernandez is that he was really, really good in his one Moto2 season, but he hasn't been good in MotoGP at any point. Even on the Tech 3 bike wasn't great to begin with. The Aprilias, not always the most competitive packages, but he just hasn't at any point really kind of outshone anyone. There's not really been a point where he's kind of outshone teammates. He's outshone anyone else in the manufacturer in the same way that Agura's done this year. At points where he's outshone everyone within Aprilia.
Yeah,
that's the thing for me is that you can defend Raul all you want of he's Moto2 season. The bikes haven't been great. But
4 years ago, isn't it though?
Yeah, but good riders on bad bikes have still been able to show some good potential. And I think this is the thing for me. So, yeah, I trust that Trackhouse isn't, they're not instantly putting pressure on Raul publicly anyway. But it's hard to not look at this as anything but an opportunity for next year, and rightly so, because Raul hasn't done anything to earn his ride this year. I was very disappointed actually last year when Trackhouse announced a 2-year contract, especially when they were talking to riders like Miller or people like that who. It was a questionable decision at the time, and I think that's not really been justified yet, and I don't think it will be.
No, I totally agree with you. I think that Fernandez, he's been very lucky in his MotoGP career, and I think back to last year he had the one sprint where he led it for like 2-3 laps, and I think that really saved him in terms of look at the potential is. I have no doubt potential is there, but there comes a point where you're in your 4th year of MotoGP, you need to show it, don't you? And I think that's it. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, I do doubt the potential's there. That's that. I mean, you can talk about you can talk about Moto2 all you want, and I think people do put a bit too much emphasis on Moto2. They were really good here, but that doesn't count for anything because we've had riders that were not very good in Moto2. Look, Fabio Quartararo, for example. And that's the reality of it. You can be good in Moto2, fine, but like that doesn't necessarily translate into MotoGP, and it hasn't for Raul. And I think whatever potential there is. Has either was not really there to begin with, or it's just sort of been beaten out of him because he's just not continued to perform, and that's piled the pressure on him, and it's just it spiraled from there. But there does come a point where you have to pull the ripcord, and I think even with a 2-year contract, Trackhouse does need to look at options for next year.
Yeah, we'll see how that market goes. It's fascinating with those satellite teams as Lewis touched on with Miguel Oliveira and Toprak, and just while I'm looking at the timing, Manu Gonzalez is 22nd and last, but he's done a 48.6. He's 2.6 off. I think the best time is Marc Marquez is 45.9. So I mean, he's done 24 laps, and he's near on pace with Somket Chandra. So
wow.
What does that tell you in terms of Manu's potential there for one day or half a morning of testing already? So yeah, keep an eye on what happens there. I think that the talk around Toprak, obviously we'll cover that more in detail, but I believe it's going to be announced at Mugello or before that. And yeah, I suppose we can end on that, Lewis. We'll end the podcast on it. Briefly on Toprak, I mean, it's a big draw, isn't it? I mean, there's a big push from Dorna. I get the sense that they want to have the best guy in World Superbike jump across, and yeah, it seems great for social media clicks and everything, and it's a big deal, but we'll have to wait and see how this pans out when Toprak tests, how it goes, because we can look at previous tests and think, well, he didn't blow everyone's minds like they thought he would, but I suppose it is exciting, isn't it, having someone come across from World Superbike, but then it also devalues World Superbike in that sense, doesn't it?
This is my point, is the question I want to ask is why? Why can't we have two series independent of each other with their own superstars? Why is it such a bad thing for a rider to be a great World Superbike rider? That's the thing for me about this, is why I was so desperate.
Carl Fogarty, for example, I always think, people always wanted Foggy to go across, but then it was the era and the time. But I get your point completely. He was a star in World Superbike, and that's what drew people to it,
Well, and Toprak is a star World Superbikes, and that's what draws people to it. Him versus Bulaga has been great for the series, I think, and you remove one element of that, you're going to just have a Ducati dominate next year with Bulaga, and Ducati are looking to bring Bulaga into MotoGP from 27 anyway, so then at that point you're left with kind of no real superstar draws. I mean, your reigning World Supersport champion has gone to Grand Prix racing, so like you've not even kind of got that pipeline there either.
Yeah.
But Manu Gonzalez, of course, came through the World Superbike ladder into Grand Prix, so I just... And everyone's looking at next year's. This isn't the year for results for Toprak. He needs to learn the bike. It's going to be 27 when they go to Pirelli tires, which he can ride. Blah 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 blah. Right? Okay, yeah, but how can he test and develop a bike on tires when he's not able to ride at the limit of the current bikes? Because that's the thing there. He's going to have to learn this bike. So all the development work really is going to be done by Fabio, Jack Miller if he stays.
Yeah.
Those the people that can push that Yamaha to its limit right now. Well, Toprak is there to be learning, but also then he's going to be expected to develop a bike that people aren't expecting him to be able to ride to his full potential in Michelin tires, but then why is that going to be any different on Pirellis? And with the way that Toprak rides Pirellis anyway, I'm not necessarily certain that's a good thing for Yamaha to go down, because you then run the risk of only one rider being able to ride the Pirellis in a certain way, and then I just think there's just a lot of things that just don't. I'm sorry to be a complete party pooper on the whole thing, but I'm just not that excited about it, because yes, Toprak's a great talent, but like, he's a great World Superbike talent, and it's great to see him there, and it's the reason you want to sit and watch World Superbikes. Why would anyone want to watch World Superbikes next year when the guy that has been the main draw for a number of years now isn't there? And that's with full respect to everyone else in the grid, but you pull him out, you've got this dominant Ducati with Bulaga who's been riding great, but he's not going to have any competition. And then he gets pulled out, and then what have you got? You've got a championship of, Jonathan Rea versus Andrea Locatelli versus, Iko Lecuona versus Sam Lowes. How do you generate hype around that? Again, with all due respect, but these are, Jonathan Rea, great with 6-time world champion, but he's been there for a long, long time now, and he's not been competitive for a long time either. I feel like we'd be ripping the heart and soul out of World Superbikes by taking Toprak out of it, and that's it. And then the worry is he goes to MotoGP, doesn't have a very good first year, so then that kind of puts the pressure on him. And then if he doesn't then perform in the second year when he's supposed to be really strong in the Pirellis, that's kind of him. That is it for MotoGP. He's not going to be sticking around for very long. And the other worry as well, that if the Pirelli tires don't suit his kind of the Michelin tires, don't suit his riding style, the risk there of him over pushing the bike and then ending up crashing and injuring himself, and then the whole project's a bust anyway. That would be a real shame, but it's something that can happen. I think there are still there are too many things here to make me confidently go, yes, Toprak's going to be a great MotoGP rider, because there are a lot of great MotoGP riders on that grid right now that he's going to have to be on par with. And, we don't know yet. Is Toprak as good as Marc Marquez, as Pecco Bagnaia, as Alex Marquez, as Pedro Acosta, as Fabio Quartararo? I don't know. We don't know.
Yeah. That's the question, isn't it?
I don't think he would be, personally. because you look at those guys and what they've done over the years and how they ride those bikes, and So I think the Toprak thing. I think if he comes over, great. I hope it does work out. I don't want anyone to sit there and think I hate Toprak or anything like that. Like, I want it to work out. I think it's great to have more nationalities on the grid. I hope this then means we get a Turkish Grand Prix back, because Istanbul Park is fantastic.
Oh, yeah. Brilliant.
But there's just still quite a lot of problems with this, and then it does make me worry about the future of World Superbikes as well. If we lose Toprak and then we lose Bulaga, where does the championship go?
That's my thought on it all. It's World Superbike loses a lot, and it heavily relies on Toprak in the sense of, I don't want to compare it to Valentino Rossi, for example, but it's like he is that draw there, and
I don't think it's unfair though. Yeah. Well, I mean,
he is that person that brings it.
You look at, I think you look at, during Jonathan Ray's kind of dominant period, and you remember when he got quite far in BBC Sports Personality of the Year award, and which is essentially, it's a popularity vote. It's not really decided on anything. So but he got through to second, beat quite a lot of big names, and all the UK press sport press was like, why? Why was this? Why? And I think that kind of says a lot there about the sort of star power of riders like that, where he's a big name and he has he has his following, but as a casual viewer, is that something that's going to be, because my stepdad doesn't really care about motorsport for as long as I've known him, but he'll sit and watch World Superbikes now. And he'll come out, do you see that? Toprak did that.
Toprak, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and it's that. He didn't mention Jonathan Ray or Alex Lowe's or anyone like that. It doesn't matter. It's Toprak. That's the exciting thing, and it's the same. It's the same in any championship. You get the casual viewers; they have that one thing to my girlfriend's dad's always text her after a MotoGP races, going, "Oh, didn't Mark do such a good job?"
And, I've seen it, so I have. She showed me the text message.
Did she?
Yeah, she showed me at Silverstone.
Oh, right.
Yeah, no. She was like, do you want to see what my dad texts me after every MotoGP race? I'm like, yeah, I'll have a look at it. And it's just like Mark with a thumbs up. So I'm like, do you know what? In terms of casual viewing, I think that text message is perfect. So
but every championship has that, and it's like, and Toprak is that for World Superbikes, and I just. For me, it's like, what is wrong with being a great World Superbike rider? That seems to be, is like everyone's like, oh, you must come to MotoGP to be a great, and it's like, well, all right, if we're going to throw that argument around, Joey Dunlop, Michael Dunlop is people. There's been that argument, you can be a great motorcycle, you can be a great racer without being, perceived to be the best in the top. What is perceived to be the top
Grand Prix
championship
level, exactly.
You look at other, but the F1 debate, Hamilton, Schumacher, whatever. But you can't tell me that someone like Tom Christensen has won fucking 9 Le Mans 24.
Exactly.
Sebastian Loeb. You can't sit there and go, those people don't have a claim to being the greatest drivers ever, because their achievements aren't undermined by the fact they're not Formula One achievements. And I think that this is the thing as well for me, is that we need to stop being so, these riders need to come to MotoGP. It's like, well, let them be 5, 6, 7-time World Superbike champions. That still makes them a great, and Toprak certainly deserves to be labelled as a great World Superbike rider. So, I think we need to change this narrative as well. This doesn't help Superbikes a lot. People will like to defend it, but then they go, we need to see this best in MotoGP. And it's like, well, that you're not really... That'd be like saying, I've got this great band, but that band member should be in a bigger band because that would then make them a great artist. That's not how it works.
You're spot on. So I think that I hope that people can understand that, as you say, it's not all about, some people it is all about being at the top of the elite level of motorbike racing, but, think back in the 90s and stuff, people were like great 250cc riders, and that's all they did, and that's all they're remembered for now, and it's still good to see. Talked about Fogarty and stuff. I mean, Card Fogarty, I think he tried. I think he had like a wild card in a Grand Prix back in the early 90s, and it wasn't for him, and he just went, well, let's make a career on the roads and then go and do World Superbike, and then look how that is. People still look at Card Fogarty in the sense of like, he's the king of World Superbike, even though when stat-wise, number-wise, people have done way better, but Foggy still has that acclaim. So I think, yeah, good points about people wanting everyone in MotoGP when, sometimes you're better off staying where you are. And I think that when Toprak, and if it does get announced, which I think it will, I'll be willing to do really well because it's a good cat for World Superbike to then look at it and go, look what we produced, as you say, with Manu Gonzalez going right from 300s to potentially going to MotoGP, currently testing in MotoGP, and then Toprak to come in and do well. That'll be something for them to, kind of say, look, we produce riders that are able to get to this level. But yeah, I don't know how it's going to go. I hope it goes well for Toprak, but we'll wait and see. And yeah, we'll cover that more in detail. I'll get Alex, our World Superbike rider, to come on and talk with me about it because I'm sure he's plenty to say about it because he's watched, I think, every single Toprak race from like stock 600 too. So yeah, he knows his stuff about Toprak. But yeah, let me know what you thought of the weekend at Aragon. I mean, if you're not a Marc Marquez fan, you're probably going to be a bit disappointed. But yeah, the title race, like I say, it's starting to change with Marc starting to turn the screw. And let's see what happens when we get to Mugello. If you enjoyed the video or podcast, 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. I'll link it in the bio of the YouTube channel if you're watching, because some people have asked how you can leave a review. I'll put it in there. And like I say, on YouTube, leave your comments. And we'll see you next time. Take care.